What's up, wizards? Welcome back to Across the Horizon, which is a collaboration between Hacking Fate, which is me, Michael Beeson, and beside me, Renaissance Astrology, Christopher Warnock, or rather, Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. So we will be jumping into Aphorism 9, and I will let Chris go ahead and get us started with the Partridge translation.
Okay, this is a really important aphorism when it's just widely quoted, and it says, forms which are generated and corrupted are subject to the celestial bodies and are moved by them. Therefore, they that frame images do make use of them by observing when the planets enter into these constellations and forms.
All right, I will go ahead and read off the Ashman translation. And this is, in their generation and corruption, forms are influenced by the celestial forms, of which the framers of talismans consequently avail themselves by observing the ingresses of the stars thereupon. So how is this a thing, and how do talismans work?
You know, it's interesting because, this is quoted all over the place, and particularly by, traditional astrologers that are talking about, or astrological magicians that are talking about talismans. So it really points to one of the most basic types of talismans. And Thabit ibn Qurra starts off as de imaginibus with one of these talismans, and I think may even cite to this the Centiloquium. And his first talisman is a scorpion talisman, and obviously in the desert, you can see there's probably scorpion pest control talismans are the most popular pest control talisman. And, and I think if you've ever been camping, I think scorpions like to get in your boots and sleeping bag and stuff like that. So it's obviously something they're into. So what they do is they make a scorpion, protection talisman or a pest control scorpion talisman by using the sign Scorpio. And the view being that the celestial scorpion, is there connected to the material scorpions, and having that form and having that more perfect form, then connects to the material. So that the celestial is really a key intermediary. If you think about the whole Neoplatonic or Hermetic view of the one, right, and then there's a differentiation in the divine world. This is like 3 books of occult philosophy. So the divine ideas of things. So that the archetypal scorpion, right, exists in that divine world and then manifest in the celestial world and the intermediate world as the constellation or the sign Scorpio. And so you can affect physical scorpions by tapping into that energy or tapping into that archetypal, spiritual energy. And so, for example, if you're going to do a curse talisman for Scorpio, so you have Scorpio rising, right? And then the ruler would be Mars. So you want to afflict Mars, like maybe put in the 8th, or have the 8th ruler making applying opposition, or Mars in detriment, or something like that. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. But that would be the sort of essence of it. And then when you make the talisman, you would actually use a picture of a scorpion, right? And so that would be on the talisman itself. Would be so not only are you using the Scorpio in your election, but you're also using it in the image that you would put on the talisman. And so those are all connected. So there's a spiritual connection between the Scorpio image and then actual scorpions as well, and then back to the celestial scorpion, and then back to the archetypal scorpion. So those are all connected hermetically, and then as astrological magicians, we can sort of tie those together and use them. So this is a really key aphorism. It's one that's cited a lot, and it's also a pretty bedrock sort of principle of how astrological magic works, and then also just in a practical sense, how do you make talismans? And this is giving you a lot of guidance as far as how you'd actually make the talisman.
So is this only referencing the constellations, or is it referencing the planets as well, like all the various things associated with like Saturn or with
Everything.
Venus?
I mean, everything. What I'm saying is that what the most directly points to, yes. I mean, like, for example, if you want to do a bull talisman, you do Taurus, right? But again, the underlying principle that the celestial forms or the celestial connected to the earthly forms extends to everything. But when you start talking about rulership, then it's not an appearance. You know what I mean? I mean, Saturn rules, coal because it's black, right? But that isn't really the form of it or the image of it. necessarily. So it's like, I think that that's when you start, it's like a universal principle of all astrological magic. Um, but because that's coming from perhaps a different, like cult virtue is hidden, where the forms are really not that. I mean, that's a little more obvious manifestation of those connections.
Okay, I mean that makes sense. Would that also then work with some of the modern constellations, like the horologium clock thing, or any of those things, or would this be something that you would only stick to really for the classic Ptolemaic constellations?
It's just one of those things. It's like the my view of it is that, I mean, it's interesting because people really love those planetary tables, right? You've got it's a table of 9 for Saturn, and up to, I think what is it for Moon? It's like 81 or something like that. It's very mathematical, and they love it because you can sort of plug these numbers into it, and you can get this result out of it. And so, but I sort of feel like that originally a lot of this information or images or whatever was imparted to people through visions, through dreams, directly from spirits, and so it's less mechanistic. So with the modern constellations, I suppose it's the level of divine inspiration, or psychic ability, or visionary ability, or the spirits that gave it to him. And I'm just a little more skeptical of whether or not horologium or whatever, where that came from. But nevertheless, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's not workable. The problem is, it's sort of like we don't have any traditional source telling us to do that. You know what I mean? I mean, theoretically it would work. I mean, I think every fixed star has a spirit, and every fixed star is going to have an effect. But of the 1,000 visible fixed stars, we only have specific information about 15 from the Hermes on the 15 fixed stars manuscript. So how you go out contacting the spirit, what their sigil looks like, all that sort of stuff is sort of unknown. That's not to say you could. So that's what I would say is that, is it a legitimate constellation? I don't know. I mean, what does it do? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it would make sense to me that you'd be able to go ahead and maybe do clocks or timekeeping or something with that, but you would just have to try it out. I wouldn't want to have a blanket yes or no that it would definitely work, it definitely wouldn't work. It seems like an exciting thing to work with. And with constellation talismans, we don't have quite as much information. And my tendency, I've been kind of working with those, is to go ahead, for example, an invocation, and like Draco, is the snake or dragon or whatever, to invoke directly with the name, and to use the form, the actual the picture of the constellation, or the dragon or whatever would be the form that I would use of it. So that does pretty much follow that principle. But again, we don't have as much information about those, but I think there's enough with the classical constellations to go ahead and have a better idea of. Now, we do have a source, Albertus Magnus, and some lapidaries that tell us what the magical effects of a lot of constellations are, the classical ones. So we do have that information. So that's what I would say about it, is that really dealing with an area that's relatively new, and we're still discovering more and more exciting things about astrological magic. So I think that would be interesting to experiment with, and I don't know exactly what the results would be with the modern constellations.
Well, I'm also gonna pester you a little bit because I know that not super long ago, because I was really excited when it came out, you released the book on constellational talismans, and I was Albertus Magnus your primary source for some of that stuff, or
Basically all of it. I mean, but
okay.
Albertus Magnus is that the source there is a book called De Mineralibus, which is Albertus Magnus was a 13th century Dominican monk. He's a saint in the Catholic Church. He's a natural philosopher, basically. I mean, he was not really a scientist, because scientists is all tied up with atheistic materialism, but he was someone who studied very intensively in what we would consider to be science now. He was looking in this book about stones and things like that. So in talking about stones, he also, of course, talked about the magical effects, because at the time that was just taken for granted that obviously there's a spiritual component to everything that underlies everything. So he talked about that. His sources appear to be what are called lapidaries, and lapidaries are sort of lists of the magical properties of particular gemstones or minerals or things like that, which are less astrological, but are nonetheless, still an interesting source of astrological talismanic knowledge. And so he lists a bunch of constellations and then gives the magical effect of those constellations. And
Cool.
that's the source, the main source that I use for that.
No, that sounds awesome, and I do like how the forms of those constellations do play into the effects of the talismans, and it does follow exactly what the Centiloquium is saying in Aphorism 9. So I think that we've probably bled that stone dry. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, then we will see you next time.